I think that owning your mess is such a strong and necessary leadership competency, because when you own your mess, you make it safe for others to own theirs. You can teach through your messes, because I don't have your skills. I don't have your talents. I can't think or speak or act like you. I can't replicate you, but I can avoid your mistakes, your bad decisions, and your messes. And if you're vulnerable enough to share them with me, man, that's half the battle, is learning from your mistakes. And so that's going to be my legacy in many ways, is this Mess to Success series.
I'm Srini Rao, and this is the Unmistakable Creative Podcast, where you get a window into the stories and insights of the most innovative and creative minds who've started movements, built thriving businesses, written best-selling books, and created insanely interesting art. For more, check out our 500-episode archive at unmistakablecreative.com.
Doing creative work can be kind of lonely, and that's why we built the Unmistakable Listener Tribe. The tribe is a community for professionals to connect and support each other. Everything is designed to help you grow your business and share what's working and what isn't. And that's true whether you're a business owner or an artist. You'll get access to feedback, live conversations with guests, and so much more. By joining the tribe, you become part of a community of creators who all support each other, and it's completely free. Hopefully I'll see you there. Visit unmistakablecreative.com/tribe to join. Again, that's unmistakablecreative.com/tribe. Scott, welcome back to the Unmistakable Creative. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us.
Hey, my honor. Thanks again for the platform.
Yeah, absolutely. So we had you back here when you wrote Management Mess. And I believe, if I remember correctly, we titled your episode, How to Become the Leader That People Would Want to Follow. And you have a new book out called Marketing Mess. And we will talk about that, of course, in a lot of detail. But before we get into that, I want to start asking you, what did your parents do for work? And how did that end up shaping and influencing the choices that you've made throughout your life and your career?
My mother was a full-time stay-at-home mom, managed the household, and was kind of a classic 1970s, housewife and mother. Very blessed that my mother was able to stay home, chose to stay home and raise my brother and I. My mother's never had a profession outside of the home. And I think did a decent job, great job raising my brother and I. My father was a full-time illustrator, mid-level leader at a defense contractor, Martin Marietta, now Lockheed Martin. Worked a very sort of stable, classic career for better part of 3 decades. And we had a very, you might say, traditional 70s lifestyle, raised in a middle-class family in Central Florida.
Yeah. I mean, what impact did that end up having on you? And what kind of advice did your parents give you about making your way in the world and career paths and all of that kind of stuff?
I think as I age and am now the son to 3 or father to 3 boys, our boys are, 6, 9, and 11. I think it's increasingly evident the impact my parents' upbringing had on me, for good and for bad, mostly for good, right? My parents were obsessed with stability. There wasn't a lot of filet mignon and there wasn't any top ramen. It was sort of like, metaphorically meatloaf every night. My parents were both raised in very unstable homes. My father's dad died when he was 10 of cancer, and his twin brother died of polio. My mother's parents were alcoholics. And so I think they went overboard a bit on stability, mostly for good, some for bad. Not a lot of risk taking, not a lot of adventure, but like I said, a lot of stability. And I think my parents taught me the value of hard work. I mean, my mother, although not a professional outside the home, managing 2 boys and getting creative with a budget and keeping a house clean and cooking 3 meals a day and, all of our homework. My brother and I were taught the value of hard work, which I have one of the best work ethics of anybody I know. That's direct correlation to watching my parents, mow the lawn and trim the bushes and wash the cars and change their own oil. And I don't do a lot of those things now because I'm able to hire and outsource them. But there's no question their stability and hard work ethic has paid off in how I parent, but also, and maybe some of the risks that I'm willing to take because they were unwilling to. So I appreciate all the good and the bad that they provided for us, mostly good.
Yeah. Well, so it's funny because I've always wanted to ask somebody this. So I kind of look back at sort of being raised by Indian parents. And of course, they're much like it sounds like your parents were: stability, strict discipline, work ethic. And it's kind of funny because I think Only now, in retrospect, do I recognize that all the things that I thought were a pain in the ass about my parents and the way they raised me have been invaluable as an adult. And I wonder, what are the things that you thought were a pain in the ass about your parents that ended up being invaluable to you later on in life?
You mean it's like kind of like general life lessons?
Yeah, I mean, things that they made you do or forced you to do that you thought were kind of a nightmare. So, for example, when we were in school, my roommate had asked me once, he said, "Did you get straight A's?" And I laughed. And I said, "Dude, getting straight A's was kind of a rule of my parents' household. You didn't get your report cards put on fridges because Indian parents don't do that. That's just what they expect." And I realize now it wasn't actually about the grade. It was about developing the intrinsic motivation to actually finish something and do something well.
Gosh, these are great questions that I've never been asked before, including by my therapist. So I had to think about that.
I've been known to do that to people.
We were not required to get straight A's. My brother did. I clearly did not. I kind of go back to my previous comment of we were raised about the value of hard work. My parents were big on saving for a rainy day. My parents were never caught off guard. And so we did not take elaborate vacations and buy elaborate homes. We lived a nice upper class, middle class family, upper middle class, I might say. We had everything we needed and not everything we wanted. And so I was taught the value of paying cash for items. I mean, I have, visceral memories of my mother putting, money in bank envelopes, power, phone, water, cable, church, tithing, donations, The visualization of that was indelibly imprinted into me. I think my parents wanted us to have a normal childhood, right? So, for us, normal was church on Sundays and to bed by 7:30 and breakfast in the morning. We read the newspaper. We, played sports. We had music lessons. They worked really hard to provide us with what they thought was stable, well-rounded life. We went to the museum. We went to the library. Vacation for us was a 4-day drive to Minnesota to see grandma, right? And back. Truly, 4-day drive or 5 days. So not a lot of luxuries, but like I said, everything we needed, not everything we wanted.
Well, it's kind of funny because even having everything you needed but not everything you wanted is a fairly privileged existence.
It is now.
I recognize that. Yeah. I recognize that now. Like, I always thought, my dad is a college professor. He's never going to be rich. I don't want that life. Now I look at my parents, I'm like, you guys have it pretty damn good.
Same with my parents as well. I look back on it now. I was at my publisher a few years ago in Miami. And as my first book, Management Mess to Leadership Success, was launching. They flew me down there because they wanted me to educate like a 20-person sales team, social media, marketing, Google, websites. And so here I am recanting my upbringing in the room. And as I was talking about my life, you could just see like jaws dropping in the room, because these were people from the Bronx. These are people from New Jersey. These are people from immigrant families and Latino families. And I just thought everyone's mom stayed home. Everyone's dad worked one job from 8 to 4. And, everybody lived like I did. It was fascinating to watch what I thought was a very replicable, normal, middle-class upbringing. Not a person in the room, not a millennial, not a Gen Xer. Nobody could even relate to my life. And I thought my life was like just, a normal American life from the 70s and 80s. And for me, that was a massive mindset shift, because although I didn't think I'd lived a privileged life by any means, I lived an outrageously privileged life to those 25 people sitting around the table. They couldn't even relate to most of what I was talking about. I wasn't riding horses in Madison Square Gardens or summering in the Hamptons or any of that crap. None of that.
Yeah.
But even my life was unrecognizable to them. A mother that didn't work 3 jobs was privileged to them.
Yeah. Well, I think you bring up an incredibly important point about context and how cognitive biases distort our perception, whether it's, reading a book or writing a book. We look at it from our own perspective. You've been, around the corporate world. You've had a lengthy career. You've been successful. What have you learned about cognitive biases and, how we overcome them?
Well, there's so many different cognitive biases, right? There's so many unconscious biases that we have. I mean, I have learned as the curator of Franklin Covey's thought leadership for 25 years and as an author and the editor of many of our books, including one on unconscious bias, is that it's not a bad thing. All your biases aren't bad. There are biases that are helpful. There's biases that are destructive. There's biases that are uplifting and de minimis. I think just recognizing that we all have biases and that they cloud our paradigms, our mindsets, our belief systems is half the battle, is recognizing that not everybody has the same path you took or had the same head start. And once you recognize that this isn't a badge of shame, this isn't something to be ashamed of, just to recognize that our cognitive biases have a massive impact on how we treat other people, how we lift or bypass other people, how we shut down other people's perspectives. And this makes you more patient, more humble. It makes you more focused on what is right than being right. It makes you more aware of when you're arguing for your own benefit, perhaps to the benefit of others, that still benefits you. So I could take that in so many directions. The more you are aware of your biases, the less you're insecure about them, the less you're needing to deny them, and just embrace them, understand them, and then figure out how does that impact the decisions that I'm making and how I treat other people.
Yeah. Well, to kind of, piggyback off of that, we're in the process of putting together a series on cults of personal development. People will have heard this already by the time they hear your episode. And one of the things that I have, noticed in my conversations with all of the guests is that from the standpoint of sort of self-improvement organizations, one of the things that goes sort of overlooked or completely ignored is context, not just on the part of the consumer, but also on the part of people who deliver this stuff. Because what ends up happening is that, for example, let's just take Franklin Covey, right? Let's just say 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And it's kind of similar to something that my friend Benjamin Hardy wrote. It was like 8 things that everyone should do before 8 a.m. And I'm thinking to myself, there's nothing that every single person on the planet should do before 8 a.m. Because if you've just worked a midnight, a 13-hour shift at a hospital, the only damn thing you should be doing before 8 a.m. is going to sleep. And yet people take advice like the stuff they get from 7 Habits or even stuff like the thing that, Ben wrote, and they treat it like a map as opposed to a compass. Why do they do that? And what do they need to be aware of? And what do you think is the responsibility of people who create this stuff? I mean, you're, like you said, in charge of thought leadership.
Well, I can only speak for the role that I've played at Franklin Covey. I, of course, can't speak for other authors or thought leaders, but we like to identify principles that we think govern all human behavior. These are immovable laws that are present in our lives, regardless of what time we do or don't start work, what our religion is, gender, generation, country, you name it. So we generally like to uncover, identify principles, things like, don't gossip, and understand the difference between effectiveness and efficiency and urgency and importance. Not everything is a principle, but we generally like to find principles that are self-evident, immovable, and everlasting, and then teach techniques, tools, strategies, mindsets, skill sets around those. And again, not everyone finds every book or every thought leadership, every podcast helpful for them. A lot of principles, a lot of governing values apply to a lot of people. But you're right, there's not a whitewash strategy for everyone. But I think I could name 5 or 6 principles that govern everyone's behavior and say, yeah, that's true in every culture, every religion, for every job.
If you're looking for the next best thing to invest in, try investing in your long-term health with Forward. Forward is intelligent medicine with a personal touch. Their doctors are dedicated to catching top killers like cancer and heart disease early, which could save you tens of thousands of dollars in the long run. So invest in a doctor that's invested in you. Visit GoForward.com to learn more about how Forward can help you manage your long-term health risks for one flat monthly fee. That's GoForward.com.
This episode of The Unmistakable Creative is brought to you by ThoughtWorks, a global technology consultancy that's hiring senior and lead developers, data engineers, infrastructure consultants, and more to join them in their roles across the United States. It's pretty clear that last year changed our working lives forever, and maybe it made you realize that you were ready for a change. At ThoughtWorks, they challenge curious minds to make a real impact, get to know them, and discover how you can make your mark in tech. At ThoughtWorks, you're free to seek the most ambitious challenges, free to change career paths, free to use technology as a tool for social change, and free to be yourself. They're looking for change makers, opportunity creators, status quo shakers, thought workers. And if you're listening to The Unmistakable Creative, that's probably you. Learn more and apply at thoughtworks.com/careers. Again, that's thoughtworks.com/careers.
Yeah. Well, speaking of which, I think that before we get into the book, I have one more last question about this. And I think even talking about those principles would make a lot of sense in this context. So you mentioned that you were raised in an environment that encouraged stability. And I now realize my parents encouraged that as well. And I was thinking about this, I was actually writing about this the other day. I said, all advice is just is observation based on personal experience, no matter who gives it. And, the most ridiculous example that I have written about was, I had the experience of dating women with small dogs, which led to the observation that they're a pain in the ass and the advice that you shouldn't date them. Of course, that's totally nonsense because that's my bias based on my experience. And my parents, I realized, gave us the advice to pursue something stable based on the fact that they grew up in an environment where it was either poverty or security. And so I wonder, having had that experience with your parents in which they encourage stability, what is the message you're passing on to your own children about the importance of risk?
Well, I think my parents actually were a little too stable because they were very risk adverse for understandable reasons. So I've tried to balance that out. Now, again, I was the beneficiary of the upside of enormous stability, right? So when it came time for college, they had saved the money. When it came time, to pay for all of their own expenses in retirement, they're not requiring my brother and I to do that. So there's massive upside to my parents' risk adversity. They never went boom or bust, right? It was all very meatloafish. And I think for me and my wife, we're trying to balance that out a little more. Like my parents are still in the same home that they were married in 58 years ago, right? My wife and I have owned 5 homes in 9 years. Not because we were being a victim, but because it was a business for us in some cases, right? And, selling and flipping. My wife and I have done extremely well. It allows us to send our children to a private school education. So for us, we're just trying to balance that. We always have money for our necessities. Great example. We were in Phoenix a month ago and a car that we own, a very luxury, expensive car, broke down in the middle of the Arizona desert. And my oldest son watched us have access to all kinds of options, right? Fly home if we need to, rent a car if we need to, have the car towed if we need to, rent, whatever we needed to. There was no stress because, we had AAA that could tow us 500 miles if we needed to. So my boys see the value of, having saved for a rainy day, but they also see the value of we're going to Italy in August and it's going to be a very wonderful, life-changing event. So we try to balance out what my parents taught us with the idea of, I just quit a 25-year executive level job. In the middle of a pandemic, I left a 7-figure job to go out and launch my own brand. And my boys know that's a big risk, right? And we're not spending our money like we used to because I'm in the middle of a 3-year build of a brand and a strategy. So I think the boys are watching, I hope, what is a nice balance of save for a rainy day, don't overextend yourself, and occasionally, if you want to make a giant leap forward, you might have to take a risk that could not pay off, but don't bet the house on it.
Yeah. I do want to come back to the risk, but I want to ask you one more thing about, raising children. How do you think about educating children? And this is a strange question considering I don't have any myself, but my dad's a college professor and we have constant arguments about, the value of formal education. Look, I think that my formal education was invaluable. I didn't realize it at the time, but I also question, the validity of how it's structured. And so I wonder how you think about sort of educating your kids. I know they're young, but when you think about sort of, higher education and, what you encourage them to do in that regard.
I don't know, my friend. Just yesterday, my 11-year-old asked me what he should be, like what he should do for a job. And my response was happy. That was the job he should have, is what makes him happy. And he said, but Dad, all my friends are picking. Now is the time. I said, son, 5th grade is not the time to be picking what you should do. I'm 53. I don't quite know yet what I want to be. So I do think that we're trying to invest as much as we can in our sons' early educations to help them uncover what are their talents. They may join the business with me. They may choose to be an author, a podcaster, and who knows what. I can assure you they'll all be on different paths. I will not be prescribing for our boys what their career will be. They may or may not go to college. Increasingly, college is a not necessary ticket for everyone. I know, which I'm sure is probably heresy, right, in your family, given what you said about your background. My brother has...
We're Indian.
Say that again?
We're Indian. Like that,
right, of course.
That wasn't negotiable.
A master's degree is phoning it in, right? So
yeah, exactly.
Here's a great example. My brother has an MBA and a master's in chemical engineering from MIT. I have an organizational communications degree from a college you never heard of, and I earn 3 times what my brother does. He's got a black belt, Six Sigma certification. He's been the CEO of, but I mean, if you quantify it by money, I earn about 3 times what my brother does. If you quantify it by SAT score, my SAT score was lower than my credit score. I'm not kidding you. My SAT score was lower than my credit score. So I just think, what brings you happiness? What brings you joy? What brings you self-confidence, self-esteem? What do you want to contribute? How do you find your value? We know that changes in your 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. And so I think the pressures that my boys are under they're unfathomable to my generation. And so I want to make sure my boys have the skills to, build an income that provides them the comfort and safety they need, that they have the self-confidence and the self-esteem to feel good about contributing and doing something that matters, that has meaning in the world, that, is meaningful work in hopefully a high-trust environment. And, if that means they want to become a beautician, they want to become an anesthesiologist, they want to sell bait at a bait shop, at the end of the day, as long as they can provide for themselves and any responsibilities that they create to others and do so in an ethical way, that's what's most important now. I don't think having a Lamborghini is important anymore.
Yeah. So I think
each boy will find different validation based on their own values. And by the way, we're saving for college. We do expect all 3 to go to college, but I also think it's these parents. Perhaps it's yours. I don't know that, place expectations. I know a lot of people that are very happy, that have a lot of money, that went to 1 semester of college. I know a lot of lawyers that are miserable in law, and they regret that 4 years and that $200,000 debt. But I think it's just, not always does your vocation need to be your avocation. Every child is different.
Yeah.
But my boys can't go become Uber drivers and then expect me to give them $1. No, because I worked 70 hours a week for 30 years and I earned everything I have. So I'm happy to have you drive Uber, but you're going to be driving for 23 hours a day.
Yeah. So you just mentioned that you left a 7-figure job in the middle of a pandemic. And I think that when we hear that, there's a lot of advice out there about, follow your passion, leap without a parachute and build, one on the way down, all of which actually can be really dangerous and detrimental if you're not careful. And I can't help but think that somebody listening to this basically says to themselves, well, yeah, of course, that's easy for Scott to say, take a risk and take a leap because, he has a 7-figure safety net. What do you say to that person?
Well, I think there's a difference between being reckless and being fearless. I mean, let's be very clear. I, have 3 boys that are dependent upon me. My wife, is a stay-at-home mom like her mom was and like my mom was. So I have obligations. So I didn't just, give someone the middle finger and left. I was very, very thoughtful about my exit. It was, 2 years in the process. And I made sure that the trust that I had built with the CEO and the president and the board of directors, I was the chief marketing officer, was implicit and strong, and that I had lots of options. I mean, I spent, the better part of 3 years thinking about my exit. But at the end of the day, I absolutely believe, disrupt yourself or be disrupted, act or be acted upon. So I, was careful in planning, careful in saving, careful on having some runway and some options. but I'm definitely living under a different budget, half the budget I was 9 months ago. We cut our expenses by half, and we thought very carefully about it and reined in our spending and debt and such to make sure we had a 3-year runway. I'm doing some advising work in the company I left. And so I was definitely not reckless in any manner. I was fearless. Now, some people, can be more reckless, meaning they can quit because they don't have 3 children. They don't have a spouse dependent upon them. We're a one-income family. So I was very deliberate. My wife, Stephanie, and I discussed it all. There was some risk. I left, the majority of my wealth on the table because my stock options had not all materialized. But, 25 years was enough. By the way, I am an unabashed evangelist and ambassador of the Franklin Covey Company. Couldn't find a finer group of people. I still host their podcast for them and still do a lot of work with them. But it was time for me to kind of move out of the comfort of what I knew into the discomfort of what I didn't and pivot and disrupt myself before someone else decided to disrupt me. I wanted to be in control of my career. And to do that, I had to leave and explore some new options.
No. Well, I think that makes a perfect segue into talking about the book. So, what made you want to write this book after the previous one?
Well, lots of things. So the first book that I wrote, as you know, is Management Mess to Leadership Success. The book did extremely well, and so well that I kind of found my voice in writing. I wrote a book in between that called Everyone Deserves a Great Manager with 2 colleagues that became a Wall Street Journal bestseller. And the publisher thought this was a really unique voice in the leadership space. There weren't many books that talked about the underbelly of leadership and how hard leadership is. And so they signed me to a 10-year, 10-volume series in the Mess to Success brand because I was the chief marketing officer for 8 years in a public company, almost 3 times the average of that role. My next book was obviously Marketing Mess to Brand Success. It launched a couple of weeks ago. Up until just a few hours ago was #1 in the small business category for over a week. My next book in that series is Job Mess to Career Success, followed then by Communication Mess to Influence Success. So I'll write a total of 10 books in the mess to success genre because I think that owning your mess is such a strong and necessary leadership competency because when you own your mess, you make it safe for others to own theirs. You can teach through your messes because I don't have your skills. I don't have your talents. I can't think or speak or act like you. I can't replicate you, but I can avoid your mistakes, your bad decisions, and your messes. And if you're vulnerable enough to share them with me, man, that's half the battle is learning from your mistakes. And so that's going to be my legacy in many ways is this Mess to Success series.
Well, I think that actually is such a perfect frame for talking about everything that you wrote in the book. So let's start, at the sort of beginning where you talk about something where you say the instinct to survive and thrive internally in any culture frequently gravitates our efforts away from our clients' needs. And so how do you actually shift them back towards your clients' needs? And why do people have that instinct to thrive internally and ignore their clients?
Well, this is challenge 1, right? In Marketing Mess to Brand Success. Yeah. The book is based on 30 challenges. This is called It's the Customer Stupid. If you read the story in the book, you'll know why I call it that. It was based on a 1992 U.S. presidential campaign where it was called The Economy Stupid. I think it's natural for us, right? Every organization, I don't care if you're a solopreneur or you're Exxon, you're going to have this sort of gravitational pull towards your EBITDA, your P&L, your mission, your needs. Quite frankly, your clients don't care about your mission. They don't care about your EBITDA. They don't care about your third quarter earnings call and your, price per share. They care about their EBITDA, their third quarter, their needs. So in every organization, I write about how you should monitor how much you're talking about the client versus yourself. You have to recognize that there is this irresistible gravitational pull to focus on your business. And in many ways, marketing is responsible for being the voice of the customer. This is just a natural thing that every company goes through until they have perhaps the stamina, the discipline, the runway to be fiercely focused on their client. I once read that the best salespeople are not those that have memorized their third quarter revenue goal. They've memorized their client's third quarter revenue goal. that they're obsessed with their client success. It seems like a no-brainer, but in every company I've worked for, there is this sort of natural gravitational pull to focus inward when you've got to be aware of that and focus, if not as much, more outward.
So one of the things that I definitely want to talk about, and as I was telling you, I think this is something that is like a curse for creatives, is they think way too much like artists and not enough like business owners. You talk about this idea of staying close to the cash. Let's go deeper into that.
And this is challenge 3, right? And this is really about, regardless of what role you're in, if you're get a side hustle, we tend to do things that bring us validation. We tend to go where our strengths validate us, where we feel the most joy. And regardless of whether you're working for a Fortune 5000 or you're in an Inc. 5000 or you're just an upstart, like I said before, person that owns their own business, you got to make sure that you are an integral part of the cash generating machine, that what you're doing is driving cash. And if you work for someone else in a boutique firm or wherever, that you stay close to the cash, meaning you're not hiding in innovation or hiding over behind, UX design. You've got to make sure that you can consistently articulate how you are either generating revenue and profit or reducing costs or supporting someone who does. At the end of the day, the people who build their careers are those that are closely tied to the cash generating machine. And so I think a lot of artists and creative types and right brain thinkers have probably done themselves a disservice because they've gone where their passion is, but they're not brutally aware of what is their company's money-making model. You need to have a level of financial acumen, business acumen, to understand how does the organization you work for or with, or if you are the owner, how do you make money? And you can't just outsource that. Stop saying, I don't want to be part of that, or that intimidates me. You've got to understand it. And if you want to build your career and not always be wondering if the shoe is going to drop, because the first person that goes in a company when cash gets tight is the artist, is the creatives, is the marketers, the advertisers, the public relations people, because they're not tied closely in the CFO's mind to the money-making model. And there are 5 parts of every business: cash, margin, velocity, customers, and growth. And you need to understand which of those are most valued in your business and how do you stay close to those so that when the axe comes wielding, they realize, and they usually is someone in the C-suite, we can't possibly cut Tina because Tina is the brain behind this, and that's providing us with, life-generating cash, or it's reducing customer churn, or it's increasing our subscription or expansion rates. Do not hide behind your creativity. You've got to stay close to the cash, or you will constantly be surprised and having your career be decided by someone else.
It's funny you say that, because I remember once somebody told me, I just want to be creative and have somebody else figure out how to run the business. And once we raised a round of funding, I became very obvious and was like, that's not how it works. You don't get to just be creative and have somebody else generate revenue off of your passion, especially if it doesn't serve anybody's needs.
Yeah, I think that is irresponsible, short-sighted, and that person needs to be reminded, you can think that, but don't say that. And that comes out in your behaviors, and you'll give license to other people to do the same. You have got to pay the price to learn the business side. You have to be able to read a P&L. By the way, you don't have to be a financial expert to be a CPA. You just have to be literate enough, because you should require that and everyone that works with and for you.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about this idea of lots of stuff that doesn't work, because I think that one of my favorite Seth Godin phrases is this might not work. And I remember him saying is that before I start any project, before I attempt anything, I say to myself, this might not work. And I always love that, because it basically reduces your sense of expectation, which I think often is what leads to disappointment for a lot of people. But you actually broke this up into several different parts when you say, reduce the compunction to save the day, minimize or eliminate phrases you say too often. So let's go deeper into this whole idea of things that don't work.
I think the general idea of this is to, recognize as a marketer, as an entrepreneur, as a creative mind, you probably have no shortage of great ideas, but there will always be more great ideas than there is capacity to execute them. Sometimes your own creativity can be your biggest enemy. So you might need to surround yourself with people that are good at process or linear thinkers. You might decide that if you're opening every meeting with, well, what if we did this? And what if we did that? And if you're a charismatic person, you might sell all 9 of your ideas. Therefore, all 9 are going to be executed at a B quality, then 1 or 2 at a A+ quality. It requires perhaps unnatural level of self-awareness. Sometimes you should not be throwing out 15 ideas. Perhaps you should. I was privileged to interview Karen Dillon on the podcast that I host called On Leadership with Scott Miller. Karen Dillon is the former editor of the Harvard Business Review. She's become a good friend of mine, and she is the co-author of the book with the late Clayton Christensen, How Will You Measure Your Life? Phenomenal book. Highly recommend this book, How Will You Measure Your Life? Well, in this book, they drew upon another colleague's research from HBS, Harvard Business School, that said that empirically, 93% of, quote, successful organizations, as measured by financial success, achieved that success with what they called an emergent strategy, not their deliberate strategy, meaning that in 93% of the cases, what made this company financially successful was an emergent strategy, a different strategy than the one they originally set out with. Only 7% of the time were companies successful with the original idea of the founder, of the creator. What was common 97% of the time was they had to pivot, they had to change, they had to be open to influence, they had to be willing to change their mind. Perhaps their genius idea was not the idea that was going to create success for the organization, for the entrepreneur, for the side hustle. So I think there's this delicate balance of knowing, when to be creative and when to just go execute on it, when to pivot, when to recognize this may not work, that I might have to pivot on a dime, to know your own impulses. I love to save the day. I love to be the guy that rushes in and picks up the pieces and saves the day, not at the expense of anyone else, but I like to be the guy that's recognized as saving the day. I like to work in urgency mode. I like to work in deadlines and have the dopamine and the adrenaline. The problem is I love to work in crisis mode so much that I'll cook one up. If one doesn't exist, I'll elevate something to crisis level so that I get the adrenaline. And therefore, I'll elevate stupid stuff to crisis level. And my family and friends and colleagues know that, so I give them permission to call me out. I just think it's having self-awareness to understand some stuff will work, some stuff will not, and to have the judgment of when you should pile on more stuff as, kind of a plan B or plan C, or is your plan B, C, and D inhibiting you from executing on your plan A? It's just this broad self-awareness of how much is too much.
Yeah. Let's briefly touch on process because there's quite a few other ones that I want to get to. But it's funny because I think this is something that creatives resist a lot. And I know you wrote about this because I realized that every single thing that we produce is here at Unmistakable Creative is the result of a system and a process. And it's something that I literally am basically constantly tweaking to maximize output.
Sorry, I missed your question in that.
Yeah. So process is one of those things, to your point, that creatives resist. How do people build one? Because I know that building process has been essential. I mean, Victor Chang wrote this amazing book called Extreme Revenue Growth, which I basically beat like a dead horse to anybody I talk to. I treat it like the Bible, because he says that one of the things that he does, in taking a company from $1 million to $25 million in revenue, one of the very first things he does when he goes into any organization is he has them literally document every single process for every task.
It's a superb book. Your recommendation is well served. What you're speaking about right now is Challenge 12, install processes to harness creative minds. Now, this may or may not be a reasonable statement, but I think the majority of marketers, of creative types, right-brainers, generally loathe processes. They're usually more spontaneous. There's like me, they're perhaps sometimes precocious in their thinking, and I mean, I haven't had a linear thought my entire life. I'm not very good at processes. I'm good at vision. I'm actually great at executing, but I don't always know what should come after B, because sometimes I put J after B, right? So I have to have the self-awareness again to surround myself with people that are linear thinkers, that know how to get from A to B. And sometimes my creativity needs to be reined in, because I think a lot of times our unbridled creativity can interrupt our results, can interrupt with so many ideas that we actually never land the plane. The plane just runs around and runs out of gas. So I think all creativity needs some level of structure to safeguard its success, because I think the most genius creative types complement their right brain thinking with left brain thinking, perhaps those around them, to push back, to harness, to focus, to put some guardrails on, so that we're not just, kind of running around and then running out of gas. And this was not easy for me, because as a creative thinker, as a CMO, I did not like people reining me in. I was a big thinker, shock and awe, right? Bigger was better and everything. And so I had to recognize the balance of when to surround myself with people who may not make my ideas smaller, but would make sure that my plane landed safely and on time, all passengers alive.
Yeah. Well, speaking of shock and awe, I think this was probably my favorite quote in the entire book. And you talked about publicity stunts, and you said stunts are classic groupthink. Your product or service can't stand on its own. So a well-intended yet inexperienced team member cooks up a plan to shock and awe your way to free publicity. Nearly all stunts like this fail. They are neither noticed or they get noticed for the wrong reasons. Rarely, if ever, do stunts win you that long-term result you wanted and signed up for. And I think the reason that struck me is because I felt that it was highly relevant to a world in which people are constantly seeking attention on social media and seeing other people get, these just huge sort of like massive amounts of attention with hundreds of likes and, that kind of stuff, which I think we mistakenly value as useful metrics. So one, how do people stop doing that? But more importantly, I think it's a mindset in my mind that you start to realize that those things aren't valuable, because last I checked, my landlord doesn't accept, likes and retweets for rent.
In fact, to quote that, I think I wrote in the book, you cannot staple brand equity to the back of your bank deposit slip and fund payroll off of it. This is a reason to buy the book alone, because I think this chapter is really wise. If I am ever in a meeting again where someone says, let's make a viral video, and that's just idiotic, right? I mean, by the very nature of saying it means it won't go viral. I mentioned I host a podcast. It's now the world's largest weekly leadership podcast called On Leadership with Scott Miller. I interviewed the biggest, brightest minds in the world, right? People with amazing success. Rachel Hollis, Matthew McConaughey, Emmanuel Acho, Dan Pink, Seth Godin, Liz Wiseman, you name it. What they all have in common was they recognize there's no such thing as overnight success. There is overnight fame. That does exist. Google Lorena Bobbitt from the 90s. Overnight fame does exist, but there's no such thing. When you interview all these people, General McChrystal, Nellie Galan, and Bill Gates, on and on, they had so many projects, books, episodes, movies that you never saw. Rachel Hollis, right? Rachel Hollis wrote Girl Wash Your Face and Girl Stop Apologizing. In 2019, she sold more books than anyone else in America, second only to Michelle Obama. Girl Wash Your Face and Girl Stop Apologizing. Nobody knows about Party Girl and Smart Girl and the other 4 books that no one bought. And so I think there's this idea of you build your influence, your credibility, your point of view, your thought leadership, your expertise over trial and error and over decades and over years. I interviewed someone last week. This woman, her name is Tiffany Aliche. She has a book called Get Good with Money. And her book is just on fire. She's a Black woman that is now, a challenge to Dave Ramsey, financial management. She launched her podcast 13 years ago. She just wrote her first big book, and it's exploding. 13 years this woman toiled at blogs and podcasting and an online course. 13 years. All everybody sees is her, 3,000 reviews on Amazon and her, 20,000 likes. They don't recognize the 13 years it took her to build this brand. It took me 25 years of a corporate career of 70 hours a week of moving to the UK and moving to Chicago and moving to Utah where I knew no one and, hundreds of flights and 2 million miles on Delta to 54 countries, speaking, writing, listening, and meeting for me to build my knowledge. So I took a bit of a tangent there, but there's no such thing as overnight success, and there's no such thing as successful stunts. I mean, look at some of the biggest videos, right? I mean, the thing with Tesla a couple of years ago with the sledgehammer or the rock and the window, and just be really thoughtful around that. They're gonna implode 95% of the time. You're not going to be 90. You're not going to be the 5%. Your investors don't want that. Your clients don't want that. Just go build your business the old-fashioned way. Trustworthy, transparency, hard work, treat your clients well, have a disruptive idea, be willing to change your mind, be willing to pivot, treat your current clients better than you treat your prospective clients. Don't forget who brung you to the dance. These are foundational business principles that will build your success far more likely than some stunt. The problem is they're not fun. They're not sexy. They're not immediately rewarding. They don't give you dopamine in your brain. Everyone wants to go and, spend $50,000 on some stunt because that's fun. It's not fun to call up your 40 clients and thank them for their business and ask them how you can make sure their investment in you rewards them and acts as, that's not fun. But if you ask all these business owners, this is exactly what they do. They have the patience, the deliberation, the unnatural focus to plod forward. And occasionally lightning might strike. I don't know about you. I don't know anybody who was ever struck by lightning. Thank goodness.
No, it's funny because one of the things I always tell people to do is to go back and trace the progression of any creator you admire and look at their earliest work, and you'll be shocked at how ridiculous it seems. You may not know this, but I had an assistant once put together a list of every single thing that Seth Godin had ever wrote that was on Amazon. And Seth Godin, the man who we say we'd need to invent if he didn't exist, once published a book called Email Addresses of Famous People. Which is hilarious. Like, you think, here's the guy who writes 17 best-selling books, yep. And that was how, that's part of his body of work.
You bring up a good point there. And I know Seth, I'd say very well. The guy is such a pollinator. Like he's an abundant person beyond reason and so generous. And he proves a principle, which is, in order for people to help you, you have to ask. People can't help you if you don't ask them for it. And Seth is a great example of that. Is, I love this idea about the, email addresses of, famous and successful people. I'd say to your listeners out there, if you have a celebrity crush, if you have an entrepreneur that you're fascinated with, can I tell you, they're all just like you and me. They all have email. They all had, they watched TV last night. They all did their laundry. They've all got a bill they're paying this morning. They've all got a kid that, is nasty to them. They're just like you and I. And so do not ever hesitate to reach out to someone who's your idol, who's your coach, who could be a mentor to you and say, hey, I'm doing this and I'm struggling. Could you give me 15 minutes to give me some advice on this? You'd be shocked at how many of these major thought leaders and celebrities and successful business would love to, give someone a helping hand. Do not ever hesitate to ask for someone's help. They've all got an email address. They're all checking their LinkedIn. They all watch their Instagram. They all watch their Facebook. They're all bored on a Sunday afternoon because it's raining outside, and they're on their Instagram looking at all the adoring love. They'll come across your private message. They're just like you and I. The difference is they might have started sooner, and they probably worked harder.
Well, let's talk about three components. I think these were really interesting and I think very relevant. Personas, the customer journey, and promoters. So Let's start with developing personas, because I really liked what you said about the fact that we kind of come up with these sort of, fictitious people that are just characters based more on poetic writing and stock photos than facts. So how do you actually create real ones, sort of map out a customer journey and then figure out who your promoters are and leverage them?
This was a bit of a controversial chapter, and I don't know if you agree with my premise in it or not, but, the story that I share, I think, is an answer to your question. And I'll give away part of this book. I shared a story of a private community I used to live in Park City, Utah, a fairly affluent community, very diverse, not economically diverse, but very diverse, in terms of race and paths to success. And we all got called together for an HOA meeting because the community was kind of aging out. We were kind of, getting our butts kicked in terms of new homeowners and new buyers to more progressive communities. So the community hired an outside branding agency to develop a buyer persona for our community. So you would think this would be like, this is the kind of person that we should market our community to. So if we want to sell our homes, they will buy it. So they hired this agency at an HOA meeting. By the way, this HOA meeting is full of billionaires and millionaires and then, posers like me, right? We probably owned the cheapest house in the community. And this person showed a PowerPoint deck of, I'm not shitting you, a bicycle with a basket on the front and a field of lavender in the south of France with a bottle of Bordeaux wine and a baguette. and they set up on the screen, this is the buyer persona of the lifestyle of our buyer. And I looked at them and I scooted my chair away from my table, and you could hear like an audible gasp in the room. Because everybody's thinking, oh crap, Miller's got something to say. And I raised my hand and said, I don't know about you, but I've never been to the south of France. And I've never been in a field of lavender. And I sure as hell wasn't having a baguette with a bottle of Bordeaux. What the hell is that? That's not a buyer persona. A buyer persona is an anesthesiologist from Austin, Texas, that works 80 hours a week, and she and her partner ski Deer Valley 3 times a year, and they're 5 years from retirement, and they're looking for a home because they're tired of VRBOing, and they want to retire here, and you get the point, right? Buyer persona is a tech entrepreneur from Silicon Valley that has 3 children, and they want to get out of the hustle and bustle of the city and have a more, you get the point, right? That's a buyer persona. Now you go after YPO. Now you go after, people that are, venture capitalists. You go after, that's a buyer persona. Not a baguette and a bottle of Bordeaux and a fee. What the hell is that? So you want to just make sure you know your lookalikes and you're brutally grounded in reality and who is your ideal customer? What journey are they on? What circumstance are they in? What is their circumstance? What is their job to be done? What is it they're going to hire you to solve for them? In this case, it was 2 lesbians that are highly professional in Austin, Texas, and one is an anesthesiologist, and she's on burnout, and her partner or wife or husband, for that matter, is tired of paying $4,000 a night for a VRBO, and for the cost of 3 trips here, they can own a home and eventually retire in. That's a buyer persona. Get really specific. What is the ideal circumstance or circumstances that your ideal client is in, and go after them? Because I think the object is not to build your business with the most number of clients. It's to build your business with the fewest number of clients.
Yeah. Wow. So let's talk about leveraging promoters. And then I want to talk about navigating all things digital, because I think you had some really eye-opening points there that people need to hear. But you basically, when you talk about leveraging promoters, and I'll do this in a sort of selfish way. So, we have some really loyal listeners who absolutely love us. And you talk about who, why, what do we know about them? How often do we communicate with them? Feedback mechanisms, shaping a narrative, and incentives. So we were to do that with our own, biggest fans. What would that look like?
I'm going to be vulnerable and own my mess. So I also own a career coaching business. I'm not a one-to-one career coach, but I've launched a online career coaching video-based series called Ignite Your Genius. There's 14 modules and people can subscribe to it. That's not a pitch for the business, but the setup for my story. Launched about 4 months ago and have about 1,000 people that have swiped their credit card and are going through my Ignite Your Genius career coaching business, right? How to become less accidental and more deliberate with your career business. Well, it has plateaued a bit, and I'm sort of scratching my head. And so the natural idea that comes to mind is, let's go after, everybody who has a career development title in corporate America and, offer them the subscription in hopes that they'll buy it for their company. Or let's license the intellectual property to major corporate universities that have a, in-house career, 1,000 ideas on how to develop more business. Isn't it odd that the most important business segment at the top of our brainstorming session wasn't, let's go back to the 1,000 people. Let's check in with them. How did it go? Did you finish? Where did you struggle? How can we help you? Do you have any friends or colleagues who might be interested in this? If you were stuck at module 4, is there a reason? What can we do to move you forward so you have a great experience, so you become a raving fan and a referral for us? Do you have any interest in your organization for others that might like to go through it? What can we do to make sure that you got everything you did or needed out of your subscription, your $158? So there's 1,000 people that I should be calling and emailing and networking with, not to try to get more money out of them, just to make sure that they had a great experience with my product. But if you look at the chart pad, it's like 9 things on new clients and new opportunities and, 5 kits in the mail every day to new people. No, let's go back to the 1,000 people that have already extended some trust to me. I think this exists in every organization. We get bored with our current customers. We want to go out on the hunt because that's more exciting, it's more exhilarating. I use some great examples of how there are some great organizations that, perfect this. They know where their bread is buttered. They dance with the one who brung them. Doesn't mean you should always be having a prospecting strategy. I was a sales executive vice president for a decade. I know the need to balance hunting with gathering extremely well. But there's this idea of recognizing that you're building brand ambassadors. Are you ignoring them? There's a restaurant in Salt Lake City that I go to. We go every week and we spend $130 because the owner of the restaurant is there every day, welcoming us, thanking us for our business, making sure that our boys are taken care of, refilling our iced tea, chatting with us, thanking us for our business. And I post about it on Instagram. We go back every week, and instead of earning $100 from us once a week, he'll earn $7,000 from us all year long because he's present with his current customers. I think it's an underrated business principle that so many businesses forget about.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you live in this world that is sort of obsessed with scale and hockey stick growth and unicorns. Our friend Paul Jarvis, who was also a guest here, wrote a book called A Company of One. And then there was, I don't remember the name of it, I know the author, Bo Burlingham, wrote a book about businesses that intentionally stayed small.
Yeah.
For this very reason.
Yes.
Well, let's wrap this up with probably the second favorite thing that I had in the book, which was about navigating all things digital. You said, over-deliberate, don't overbuy upfront, master and fully implement what you already have. And it made me think of an experience I had recently. So our investors usually will send out, different resources to all of the people in our portfolio at PodFund. And one of them was, a company that basically is helping people grow podcast listenership. And, they had basically been clients of The Hustle, which just got acquired for like $75 million by HubSpot. I think Morning Brew and a bunch of really, really big properties. And so I talked to them. I talked to 2 references, and then I sent it over to our hosting provider and had them look at it. The hosting provider was the only one who said, don't do this. And so I waited to see what would happen. And one of our other portfolio podcast actually did. And the results were less than stellar, which is why I think I loved this chapter, because it speaks to a lot of what I think is a bunch of bullshit in the online marketing world, which is everybody should do something. Like everybody should start a podcast. Everybody needs to be on Snapchat. So let's talk about these 3 concepts: over deliberate, don't overbuy upfront, and master and fully implement what you already have.
It's intriguing. I'm delighted that you ended with this. I wrote a book called Marketing Mess to Brand Success. 30 challenges to transform your organization's brand and your own. You would think I would have a chapter on SEO, a chapter on Google Analytics, a chapter on marketing automation, a chapter on CRM. I know. I didn't write a single chapter on any of that stuff. Those books have been written. They're written daily. Google that. I wrote one chapter kind of about technology, kind of one thing. Chapter 27, Navigate All Things Digital. And my big advice that you kind of recapped here is just be really thoughtful. You know, I have a 30-year career. I have never met an organization whose CRM was their only CRM. They always buy the wrong one first, and then their second or third CRM becomes their, evergreen ongoing CRM. Is that there is a level of impulsivity and sort of shiny, distraction. Go slow with your technology. Make sure you are leveraging and implementing the first thing you bought before you buy all of the add-on tools. Because the fact of the matter is, most of these vendors now are subscription-based SaaS models, and they're going to lure you in to have all the bells and whistles up front. You can't possibly implement them all while still keeping your job going and your day job in the whirlwind and solve all your problems. They want you to spend all your time in their tool, and the fact of the matter is, you're not going to. That doesn't mean you shouldn't maximize the investments you have with proper add-ons. I just think don't get lured into this. Well, if you don't buy by Friday, then this is going to be 50% more. BS. Just go into your technology stack, really thoughtfully deliberated. I'd argue, go talk to some of your competitors. Which ones do you use? And what did you overbuy? Go talk to some of their clients and say, what do I not need? What is it they're telling me I have to have? If you had to do this over, would you still go with them? And what do I not need? And do not fall into the trap of, if you don't buy it now, it's going to be triple 90 days from now. That's a bunch of hogwash. They want you for the long term, and they're going to meet you where you need to be. Or if they don't have your best interest in mind. So I know that it's a broad chapter. I just kind of teach, be really careful and deliberate about how you start overbuying technology add-ons and supplements before you have really recognized, do you have the capacity to deliver and implement what you've currently bought? And have you proven to yourself the ROI for that before you start adding on or buying extension services?
Yeah. Wow. You have absolutely packed this with value. And it's kind of funny because I think on the surface, this is a book about marketing, but in reality, it's a book about self-awareness in the process of building a business.
I'm delighted to hear you say that. I think you absolutely nailed it. But in many ways, I think the book is going to actually do as well with sales leaders as it's going to be with marketing leaders, because I take marketing to task. Your job is to drive sales. Your job, to your point, is not to get likes and drive impressions and create brand and brand equity. That's part of your job. But to quote both of us, you can't pay your rent on likes and brand equity. That's part of the job. But I really think that sales leaders are going to buy this book and hand it to their marketing counterpart and say, I need you in my boat rowing with me in the same direction. Read Scott's book.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I have one final question for you, which is how we finish all of our interviews with the Unmistakable Creative. What do you think it is that makes somebody or something unmistakable?
Oh, I don't know. Give it to me fresh, man. What is it?
Well, it's funny because you've answered this question before, and I didn't get a chance to go back and listen to the entire episode. But, for the purposes of writing a book, I had to define it because I wrote a book called Unmistakable, and I say it's the thing that nobody else can do in the way that you do it.
Wasn't that true? If I had to quote one person, Jan Sincero is a famous author. She wrote the whole You Are a Badass series. And when I asked her why she wrote the book, she's written, I think, 4 books in that series. These books have sold nearly 6 million copies. And she said, I wrote the book that I needed to read. Meaning the book that she had written had not been written yet. I think you may not be an original inventor, you may be a creative type, but your big idea might be the twist on somebody else's idea. You don't have to be an original inventor. I'm not sure I've ever had an original thought in my entire life. I'm an aggregator. I'm a twister. Most of all my content of books that I've done, honestly, quite well are just me taking somebody else's idea, giving them credit for it, but then twisting it and forming it in a way that works for me and works for countless thousands of others that didn't resonate with that idea, but they resonate with this twist on that idea. So I would say to anybody who's listening, don't let anybody tell you not to do something. If you found value in it, the odds are there are thousands and thousands, if not millions of others who will. You just got to go find them.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to join us and share your story and wisdom and insights with our listeners. I absolutely love this conversation because you've packed it with not only a combination of very sort of philosophical advice, but also incredibly practical advice, which I think is so rare. Where can people find out more about you, your book, and all of the other stuff that you're up to?
Hey, again, thank you for the abundance and shining your light on me. I appreciate it. You can visit me at scottjeffreymiller.com. My courses, my books, my podcast, my blogs, my Inc. articles are there. All the books that I author are available on anywhere, any retail or digital site. On Amazon right now, the most recent book is Marketing Mess to Brand Success. In January, I'll be releasing Job Mess to Career Success. In September, through HarperCollins, I've written a new book called Master Mentors. That is basically a collection of insights from my first 30 favorite guests on the podcast. And so you can, if you just Google Scott Jeffrey Miller, my handsome mug is bound to come up.
Amazing. And for everybody listening, we will wrap the show with that.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Unmistakable Creative Podcast. While you were listening, were there any moments you found fascinating, inspiring, instructive, maybe even heartwarming? Can you think of anyone, a friend or a family member who would appreciate this moment? If so, take a second and share today's episode with that one person, because good ideas and messages are meant to be shared.